From federal government, from provincial government, from development partners, they have been able to put up an extraordinary effort, and for that we are really grateful to you and we compliment your work. We have just heard about the figures on the scale of devastation in Chief Economist's presentation, the damage done, the losses incurred, and the needs estimated. But along with figures, it is equally important to understand and focus the human tragedy that has unfolded as a result of these floods. And I have repeatedly said that Pakistan has suffered a triple tragedy. The first tragedy is in its economic recovery plan. Unfortunately, when we came into government, the economy was melting and we had to go on to an IMF agreement which previous government had signed, and that agreement contained very harsh conditionalities, as a result of which the country is facing a very high wave of inflation. And the poor in Pakistan and the lower strata of the society was already struggling to make their two ends meet under a very high inflation, which resulted due to an abrupt increase in POL prices, withdrawal of subsidies. You know, if you increase price of POL by more than 100 rupees in 15 days, it doesn't take a rocket science to figure out what will be the impact on inflation. As a result, utility prices went up, and both POL and utilities are the biggest cost push drivers of inflation in Pakistan or for our economy, and they have already put us in a high inflation condition. So that was the first challenge we were facing. The second challenge came in shape of the climate disaster that first brought high temperatures, drought prospects, and then uninterrupted very heavy 2 months of rains brought devastation to the poorest of poor in Pakistan. The 20 poorest districts in Pakistan, out of them, 16 were in the eye of this climate disaster. As a result, millions of people who were already struggling to come over the poverty line have been thrown into hyper poverty cycle. Many children who were already suffering from malnutrition, millions of them are today facing the threat and challenge of hyper malnutrition. How will we save our generation with these children who will be facing the daunting task of recouping their health, and how do we give them the nutrition that they are physically back to normal life and their cognitive abilities are not compromised due to stunting. So these are the human tragedies that have fallen upon us as a result of this climate disaster. So it is a triple tragedy: the economic crisis, the climate disaster, and the human tragedy, with the poorest of the poor being the first victims and the main victims of this tragedy. I've traveled length and breadth of the affected areas, as many of you in this room have seen with your own eyes the destruction and the suffering that this climate disaster brought, and which is heart-wrenching. Women, children, elderly citizens are writing new stories of survival and resilience, withstanding the elements of nature with bare hands under the open sky, with no possessions left with them. This is made worse by the fact that most of the 94 districts declared as calamity hit are among the poorest in the country, as I said. As the relief efforts of the government conclude and the rehabilitation phase, the communities face another disaster: the spread of waterborne diseases such as dengue and malaria amid increased hunger and poverty, and the looming food crisis and chilling winter around the corner. They pose significant challenges for these people. It is also important to understand the nature of this disaster and how it is different from the floods that have traditionally inundated Pakistan. Along with the fast melting glaciers this year, monsoon rainfall almost 400 to 700% above average in some parts has swamped arid regions that have limited defenses. Hill torrents and flash floods washed away entire villages and everything that came their way. The monsoon patterns are also changing, and those areas got heavy rains this year that did not traditionally fall within monsoon range. With limited resources, the federal government and the provincial governments are dealing with the mounting crisis in collaboration with UN and other relief and humanitarian agencies. A national flood response coordination center was set up by the Prime Minister to ensure a coordinated response by disaster management agencies at federal and provincial levels. NDMA worked tirelessly with PDMAs to carry out emergency relief operations with the support of armed forces of Pakistan, in which thousands of Jawans from Pakistan Army, Pakistan Air Force and Pakistan Navy, along with the aircraft and boats, took part. An emergency fund worth rupees 70 billion was dispersed among 2.7 million households under Benazir Income Support Program by the government. Small farmers are also being given 9 billion rupees worth of wheat, seed and fertilizer to support their Rabi cultivation, along with other relief work that was done to provide tents, mosquito nets, medicines and food packets. The government of Pakistan is making plans for sustainable management of the land, including reforestation, development of climate-safe infrastructure, and adoption of other flood protection measures such as upgrading the early warning system. We are making sure that transparency in the utilization of external financial support for post-disaster rehabilitation and reconstruction is ensured. This will be done by involving civil society in the recovery process and making relevant data available to public through online dashboard. It is important, however, to understand the deeper causes of this enormous calamity, as very ably pointed out by Minister Climate Change. A recent study by over 24 scientists of Imperial College London concluded that severe weather events are becoming more frequent and more severe as a result of the global greenhouse emissions resulting from the combustions of fossil fuels. Another study by two Dartmouth researchers on the economic cost of climate change for poor nations finds that over a 25-year period that ended in 2014, US emissions alone curbed economic growth in Pakistan by $33 billion. This is just one country, but if you take G20 countries together, this figure will run into hundreds of billions of dollars. Pakistan has consistently been among the top 10 worst affected countries in the Global Climate Risk Index, but its contribution to greenhouse emissions, as you all know, is less than 1%. The attribution studies lay out a strong case for global collaboration for managing climate change-induced natural disasters. Since the G20 states contribute 80% of these emissions, they must take responsibility and for the costs of climate adaptation, emergency response, and recovery in countries that played their little part or no role in causing today's calamities. The ultimate solution to avert the horrific effects of climate change, however, lie in the global transition to renewable energy. But this will take a long time. Till then, the rich nations must fulfill their commitment made at the UN Climate Conference in 2009 to contribute $100 billion a year in climate-related financing for poor nations. The affluent nations must also grant major debt swaps to developing countries disproportionately hit by climate change, which will create the fiscal space for developing their climate-resistant infrastructure and implement other disaster mitigation strategies. The human-induced climate change poses a common global challenge which must be faced in a spirit of global partnership. Pakistan is a test case for what UN Secretary General Mr. Antonio Guterres terms climate justice. Time is of essence. The richer nations must be willing to compensate their poorer counterparts for the climate destruction happening now for the quality of life they enjoy every day. I think the people in the developed countries must realize that people in Pakistan, poorest of the poor, have paid for the quality of life and luxuries today they enjoy due to advanced industrialization in their societies. Or else, as Pakistani Premier Shahbaz Sharif told the UN General Assembly last month, what happened in Pakistan will not stay in Pakistan. The government of Pakistan is committed to systematic changes to address the underlying vulnerabilities to natural hazards. We have adopted a participatory and inclusive approach, bringing together civil society, government, private sector, academia, think tanks, and the international community around a common vision to develop a post-disaster need assessment, recovery, reconstruction, and rehabilitation plan. The Pakistani diaspora has also been engaged to help with these efforts, and I am thankful to their generous contribution so far. Based on extensive consultations, we have developed the following vision for a climate resilient and adaptive recovery. Our vision will be an inclusive and resilient recovery through a whole of Pakistan approach, leading to sustainable development for people and the country, with the following principles as guiding principles: putting the poor first, inclusion, transparency, and climate resilience. This will be based on the following pillars: build back better, people-centered, socio-economic, participatory, and inclusive recovery, building systematic resilience against natural hazards and climate change impacts, with the objectives of enhancing governance capacities of the state to restore lives and livelihoods of the affected people, especially the most vulnerable, restoring livelihoods and economic opportunities, ensuring social inclusion and participation in all aspects of recovery and related development, restoring and improving basic services and physical infrastructure in a resilient and sustainable manner, and investing in nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based adaptation measures. As I said, that this tragedy has washed away all the gains that we made in past 2 decades for poverty alleviation. Those gains have been lost in 2 months. 20 साल में जो पाकिस्तान ने गुर्बत के खात्मे के लिए कामयाबी हासिल की थी, 2 महीनों की बारिशों में वो सब ज़ाय हो गई है, तल्फ हो गई है। आज पाकिस्तान इस तबाही जिसका तखमीना $30 अरब से ज़्यादा लगा है, इसका सामना तन्हा यूं नहीं कर सकता कि ये उसके वसाइल से बहुत बड़ी है। किसी भी मुल्क पर इतनी बड़ी तबाही आए तो वो अपने वसाइल से उस पर काबू नहीं पा सकता, और जबकि ये तबाही हमारे गुनाहों का नतीजा नहीं है, ये हमारी गलतियों का नतीजा नहीं है, ये हमारे काम का नतीजा नहीं है, ये तबाही हम पे इसलिए आई है कि मगरबी दुनिया और तरक्की याफ्ता ममालिक ने गैर जिम्मेदाराना तरक्की की है। उनके कार्बन एमिशंस, ग्लोबल एमिशंस की वजह से आज पाकिस्तान के गरीब तरीन, पसमानदा तरीन इलाके तबाह और बर्बाद हो चुके हैं। तो इसलिए अखलाकी, कानूनी, सियासी, हर लिहाज से किसी भी ज़ाब्ते ये तरक्की याफ्ता ममालिक का फ़र्ज़ है कि वो पाकिस्तान की मदद करें, और ख़ास तौर पे जो बंदिशें पाकिस्तान पर हैं उन पे ज़रूर गौर करें। मैं बहैसियत डेवलपमेंट मिनिस्टर IMF को ये ज़रूर रिक्वेस्ट करना चाहूँगा कि हम पे ये कदगन कि हम अगर अपने वसाइल से भी if we want to invest in the flood rehabilitation efforts from our own development budget. We are constrained because we cannot spend 40% of our PSDP before the last quarter. I think such harsh conditionalities must be reviewed. And if the support and the help will take time from international community, at least government of Pakistan should be able to mobilize its own resources to help its own people. I think this condition of Pakistan not able to spend more than 40% of PSDP only in the last quarter is very harsh and very, I would say, unjust or unfair, because we need to mobilize our own resources to be able to meet the needs of rehabilitation, reconstruction, and I hope that IMF will also reconsider this conditionality. But beyond that, I do look forward that international community will show its commitment and moral obligation in the donors conference that is supposed to be convened shortly to take more responsibility for reconstruction, rehabilitation of Pakistan's destruction through climate disaster. That will show whether the world truly does climate justice or does not to the call of these poor people, or it turns a blind eye. And I'm very hopeful and positive the way international community showed solidarity. It came from all countries, it came from all international organizations. I do hope that this solidarity will also be matched by their commitments to help Pakistan rebuild the destroyed areas. I once again would like to thank all of you, all the members of the committee who have worked very hard on PDNA, but my request is to work equally hard on the post-disaster recovery, rehabilitation and reconstruction strategy, because we need to have it before COP and also the donors conference. I do hope that just as you have done a great job in this document, we will have an even greater job in shape of the reconstruction and rehabilitation strategy. Once again, thank you for joining and showing your commitment for Pakistan and showing your solidarity with the destruction that this climate disaster brought for Pakistan. Thank you very much.